This is the End of the Road podcast with your host, Michael Coco. Exploring the horizons we never touch because we're already there.
Welcome, and thanks for listening. Tonight we're off to London again to speak with Gary Lachman. And I think Gary's about an N of one in terms of, well, he's a member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame from his time playing with Blondie. And he's also an author of over 25 books on consciousness, counterculture, and the Western esoteric tradition. Tonight we're focusing on his new book that's just come out entitled Touched by Presence, which takes its name from a Blondie song that he wrote, but it actually chronicles his journey from Blondie's Bowery days in New York City and rock and roll to his time with magic and the occult and his transition and his interaction with all sorts of colorful characters along the way. And in some ways, Touched by Presence is analogous to Colin Wilson's Faculty X, but we'll let Gary take it from there. Okay, Gary, so I think this is my favorite quote from your book, the one that you argued with David Bowie, you got drunk with Iggy Pop, and Deborah Harry ironed your skinny ties, but when you met Colin Wilson in person, you were starstruck. So yeah. What effect did Colin have on you, or why?
This was when I made a pilgrimage to his home in a little place called Gorin Haven, in the far west country here in England, in Cornwall, and this is 1983, so it's more than 40 years ago. And it was part of a larger 2-month sort of sojourn in Europe on what I subsequently called a mini search for the miraculous. But by the time, I made this pilgrimage down there, I had already become quite a obsessive reader of Wilson's work. And it was when I was living with Chris Stein, the guitarist, and Deborah Harry. This was when she was ironing my skinny ties. We were living in a dilapidated loft space on the Bowery in New York, back 1975. So it is 50 years ago. Literally, I would have been there. Back when the Bowery was the Bowery, not like today, where it's ridiculously upscale, upmarket neighborhood. But there, the fellow who had the place or rented us our floor, he was a wild biker, gay biker artist who was into Aleister Crowley, who's the dark magician in the 20th century and all that sort of thing. And so there's all this kind of stuff about the occult around him. And then I came across a book of Wilson's just called The Occult. It was published in 1971. I was reading it 1975. But it was such a good book. It was such a good read. And I had no interest in this stuff until I started living in this place. I'd read a lot. I'd read a lot of stuff. I read like Hermann Hesse, and I read Sartre and Nietzsche. I didn't say I understood them, but I certainly read them at that time. And in this book about the occult, Wilson was talking about that kind of stuff. He's kind of seeing it in a kind of existential or phenomenological, if dare I say it, context. And I didn't know he had spent a decade and a half writing about that kind of stuff. Not in academic terms, but sort of popular books. And in any case, I just was taken with it. And so that's when I started this kind of subsequent, I don't want to use the word journey, it's overused, but this kind of, it literally changed my life because I was still playing rock and roll then, but by about 8 years later, I had left rock and I didn't know what I was doing, and but I was reading his books, and so part of this journey I decided to meet him, and I had a fantastic day with him.
Yeah, and I think you also met him in California later on, right?
Oh yeah, well, we became friends. He knew lots of people, but we became friends, and in that sense, and I carried on a correspondence with him, and then some years later. When I was working at the time, very well-known metaphysical bookshop in Los Angeles called the Bodhi Tree, that started up in the early 70s, actually by two fellows who worked for Lockheed, but they were Buddhists and they wanted to do something more meaningful So they pooled their resources and they opened up this New Age bookshop just at the sort of, there was like a cult revival in the 1960s. I've written about this, and then it kind of tagged on. It became the New Age, mind, body, spirit sort of thing like that. So they opened this bookshop, and then in the late 80s into early 90s, I was working there. And by this time, Wilson and I had been corresponding quite a bit, and he had come to Los Angeles to he was doing a book tour. He was in California, and where he was staying was like a travel lodge, and he was with his wife Joy, whom I got to know well as also. And I at the time was house sitting for one of the owners of the Bodhi Tree, and he had this fantastic 3-story place in Laurel Canyon, the Hollywood Hills, that I called the Zen Castle, and it had a jacuzzi and it had a terrace garden. And I said, "Why don't you come stay with us?" With my girlfriend at the time. And so they came and stayed. And we had a fantastic time. He came to the shop. He spent about $500 at the time worth of buying secondhand bookshops and mailing them back to England. And then, I wound up writing a book about him eventually after he died. And he died in 2013. And I did a book called Beyond the Robot, The Life and Work of Colin Wilson. And that came out, I believe, 2015.
Yeah. Well, your new book is, in some ways, all about sort of your life and letters, and you mentioned some of the people that influenced you. You said, Colin Wilson, Hesse, Kafka, Nietzsche, Henry Miller, Gurdjieff, Uspensky. You sort of go through like a biography. I mean, that's part of your biography.
It's a funny thing because I just sort of. I didn't pitch this book to anyone. I just sort of sat down, and I say in the acknowledgments in the end, I wrote it in order to stay sane. I mean, whether that worked or not, I don't know. But it was a very difficult time in my life. I won't go into the details. Difficult time in my life, and I had just finished another book, and that was all done. And if you're a writer, you always say, "Oh, you need a break," and as soon as you do, you have to find something, to occupy your time. You go crazy. So I needed to do something. And there's a wonderful place here in London, the British Library, which is a fantastic resource. And it has everything that's published in the UK, plus much else. And you can't take the books out, but you can go there and you can get a place, a desk, and you can bring your laptop and work. And so I've written many books there, many of my books. I've certainly researched a lot of them. But at this time, I was practically living there. And I just decided to write something. And I'm of an age, I'm approaching my 70th year at the end of this year. And my birthday's Christmas Eve, disadvantageous as that is. And I just sort of decided, well, people ask me this question: how did you go from playing in a rock band like Blondie, and then I had my own band for a while, and I played with Iggy Pop and so on and so on. I was in that world, intimately for quite some time. How'd you wind up going from that to doing what you do now? And so I just said, well, how did I? And I just started writing it for myself, just to occupy myself. And I kept going. And it has a weird kind of circularity to it because I started it in January. And in the actual, this is a spoiler. I mean, the book ends with my leaving Los Angeles at the end of 1995 to arrive here in January 96. I started it in January, I think, 2023. I ended it January 2024. So it has this strange kind of, circuit. I didn't plan to do that, but it just kind of worked out that way. And so I sent it off to an editor at my publisher, and I said, I don't know if this is, up your alley, but I actually respected his opinion. And so I just want to know, because I just wrote this for myself. I didn't write it for anybody else. And so he liked it. And so that's, how they picked it up and did it. So it's a very different book for me because I usually write about other people and they're usually dead. So, this time it's me, and with any luck, I'm still alive.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the acknowledgement section of all the people that you've expressed gratitude to in your life. And, Deborah Harry is there, and the other Blondie member who saved you from electrocution. And
Chris Stein, yes.
Yeah, Chris. Yeah, and you mentioned just coming to your 70th year, but I didn't realize that Deborah Harry is actually you looked at her as almost like a mother figure as well as in terms of getting your start perhaps in the acknowledgments and in other parts of the
Oh,
book.
Clearly, I most likely would not have had any kind of professional life as a musician if I hadn't been asked to audition when Debbie lost their bass player. The drum Clem Burke, who passed away earlier this year. He was one of the greatest drummers ever, and I knew him from high school in New Jersey. And I used to go to his gigs and used to hang out and stuff like that. And so I was living in New York, writing very bad poetry and starving. This was in my Henry Miller period. I was working as a messenger, if you remember, Tropic of Capricorn, the cosmodemonic
Yeah.
telegraph agency. I wasn't doing anything like that, but I was working as a messenger in Midtown. And in any case, there's all those stories in there. But I could kind of sort of almost maybe play because I had jammed and I'd hung out with lots of musicians in Jersey, but I wasn't really considered one. But this was in 1975, early 75, when what would soon be called punk was on the rise, and being a great musician wasn't really the main thing. It was just having a good look and being able to get something out of simple out of the instruments. And so I auditioned, and then so if that hadn't happened, and then also Debbie's determination to keep things going because she had gone through a string of losing musicians. And like the first gig, Clem played with them at the famous CBGB, which is the birthplace of Patti Smith and the Ramones and Television and all these other bands, and Blondie. They lost their bass player. That's why they called me in. So it worked, and then and then this is when I was living. I can't even go down this rabbit hole. That I was living in this storefront on East 10th Street, between First and A in New York's East Village, with this fellow who started out as the William S. Burroughs Jr. of Bayonne, New Jersey, my hometown, but he had become a born again Christian and gone completely like 180, complete different thing, and he wanted to go to a kibbutz because the end of the world was coming, and did I want to go with him? And that wasn't tops on that wasn't tops on my list. And so I had got kicked out of this place. I had nowhere to live, and so Debbie took me in, the waif that I was. So she, in that sense, yes. And then Chris was like a big brother, and we used to hang out in New York. He introduced me to all these people in the East Village and all that. And that was a fantastic time. It was probably one of the most fun times of my life. I was doing exactly what everybody I knew growing up wanted to do. So, I mean, who is as lucky as that?
Yeah. So when did you develop Faculty X, so to speak?
I'm still working on it. Still working on it. But as I said, my interest in the sort of thing that many years later I've wound up making something of a career out of, writing about it, started then. But the first expression of it was a song. It wasn't anything, writing a book, any prose or anything like that. And it was a song called "I'm Always Touched by Your Presence, Dear," and hence the title of the memoir, "Touched by the Presence." It's an allusion to the song, and the song is about these telepathic and shared dream experiences. My girlfriend at the time, Lisa Jane Persky, who was a photographer, she did some of the very early Blondie shoots, and she was a writer, and she for New York Rocker and other magazines at the time. An actress, and she subsequently went on to have a very long and substantial film and TV career. But the first Blondie tour, when our album came out, and came out in late '76, but we went on tour in '77. We were the support act for Iggy Pop, and he's one of the godfather of punk rock, Iggy and the Stooges. But he had gone through a couple different incarnations, and he had recently been revived by David Bowie. Actually, Bowie was playing in Iggy's band at the time, but incognito. And this was long before social media, mobile phones, the internet. So news got around by the old-fashioned word of mouth, that Bowie was playing in the band. But in any case, on this tour, whenever I wanted to call Lisa, who was back in New York, or she wanted to call me, we were practically picking up the phone at the same time. Or we would talk about dreams we had that were, very similar and seemed to be shared and things of that sort. I can't remember now the content or exactly what it was, but that was more or less, that was sort of like the nature of what was happening. And so I wrote the song about "I'm Always Touched by Your Presence, Dear," about these sorts of things. And that became a big hit for Blondie in the UK and Europe. Not so much in the States, but over here. I mean, and Blondie more or less was always more of a UK band than I think an American band, even though they had lots of hits there. And that was way after my time. So by the time this song was a hit here in 1978, I'd already left the band to seek my fortunes elsewhere, my destiny. Still looking for that, and had gone to California with Lisa because she was pursuing her acting career.
Yeah. Yeah, and you have a lot of Lisa's photographs in the book too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, she very kindly donated quite a few photographs, and shows, two shots are on the cover as well. And if you're a very keen observer, you'll see that on the cover there's a shot with Debbie and I playing, and Debbie has a Batman T-shirt on, and this would have been 77, so it's sort of before the revival of all the superhero kind of stuff. So we were always ahead of that stuff. Early on, Blondie was like a real pop culture 60s, not necessarily retro, but homage. This is one of the things that differentiated the bands in New York than what was happening in the UK, because the Sex Pistols, it was all, oh, we hate the Beatles, we hate Pink Floyd, it's all that stuff is rubbish. There's just so many earlier avant-garde art forms like the Futurists and the Dadaists. They always diss everything that went before and say that's all rubbish and blah 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 blah. But New York, everyone, it was an homage. It was a nostalgia for the roots of rock and roll. Because if you remember the early '70s, you had bands like Sha Na Na, who did all the old doo-wop stuff, and then Chuck Berry and Little Richard and all these other, Jerry Lee Lewis, all these other guys from the '50s had comeback careers. And even John Lennon was like writing songs like that again. So there was this kind of nostalgia for the roots of rock, because I think rock had got so top heavy. Progressive bands like King Crimson, and yes, you had to go to the Juilliard School of Music to play rock and roll. So thank God for this stuff that was happening, because I could never make it in the Juilliard School. I have one son who's a concert violinist, and he just finished a degree up in Manchester and all that. So yeah, he could go to the Juilliard School of Music. He could probably teach there. But no, I A D E. Oh, what's that other chord? So that was. But it was like we did it. But the thing is, they were songs, and they sounded like songs. I mean, I had no musical training, but I had absorbed everything I listened to on the radio when I was going to school in the 60s. WA Beatlesy, and the hits just keep on coming. So it was the British Invasion, then Motown, then, the San Francisco Sound, and all these other bands up until, say, the early 70s. And it was just one good song after the other. So when I figured out how to put chords together, because I was never going to be a great guitarist. This is the thing. All these musicians where I grew up, they were all fantastic musicians. They could do these Hendrix licks and Clapton, and they could nail all that stuff. I could never do that. But I think this perfectionism inhibited them from trying to do anything of their own. And I knew I could never do that. But when I put A, D, and E together, I thought, oh man, that sounds like a song. And then you come up with some lyrics, and then I've written a song. And so that was, if I could get something out of the guitar, that's what I wanted to do. And at a certain point, I couldn't do that anymore when I read too many books and I got too smart for rock and roll. And then I dropped out and spent 10 years trying to find a place for myself in the real world. And so my whole life collapsed, and the shockwave of that threw me across the United States and the pond, and left me here.
Yeah. So, well, I was kind of serious about this Faculty X business, because, I mean, you have had some, you kind of set that out in, your book, different encounters with different thinkers and different groups. And you mentioned Crowley, and you had a bout with the Thelemic OTO group that maybe wasn't to your liking. But were there any of those groups that sort of stuck with you and kept with you through over the years? Even the Gurdjieff?
Yeah. Well, I mean, a Faculty X is a phrase from Colin Wilson's book, The Occult. I first came across that when I read this in 1975. And he defines it as the ability to grasp the reality of other times and places. So not just the fact that, but the actual reality. And the famous example he gives is at the beginning of Proust's novel, Remembrance of Things Past, when it's Marcel, the character tastes a madeleine, which is a little kind of, French pastry, dipped into a tisane, a herbal tea. and suddenly he feels taken out of time, and he was no longer accidental and mediocre, and suddenly he was like lifted out of all the vicissitudes of life, or inconsequential, and all this lovely language, and he doesn't understand why he has this fantastic feeling, and then he realizes it because the taste of the Madeleine dipped in the tea reminds him of when he was young and he had spent his holidays in an area called Cambrai. And I forget his grandmother was aunt or someone used to give him a little taste of her Madeleine dipped in her tisane. So he knew that as a fact. If anyone had asked him, "Oh, Marcel, what did you do? Where did you spend your holidays when you were 9 years old?" he would have reeled that off. But that's not the same thing as this. And it's called Faculty X because, Wilson, we don't have a name for it. And that's because our language is limited, and that's a whole another rabbit hole we can go down. We know something and we can really know it. And so he really knows it. And so Wilson, he charts other examples of this in literature and his own experience. And when reading that, I realized I had felt something like that. And I tell a story of when on the second tour, it was on with Blondie, when we were in the UK. And we come to London, and we eventually we go all the way up to Scotland and back down. But the first gig was in a place called Bournemouth, which is on the coast. I mean, I've been there since, but knew nothing about it at the time. And I think we drove there in the evening. I didn't know where the hell I was, but I usually got up earlier than everybody else, and I just where the hell am I? So I just went out for a walk, and I didn't know, and I just walked down a road and turned a corner, and it's on the coast, and suddenly there was the English Channel. And I mean, the people there, yeah, sure, mate, that's the Channel. We see it every day. But for me, it was like, wow, and then France is over there, and then suddenly it was kind of like, if in dreams somehow it's real, and it's more real than it ever is in real life. It's super real there, and it was like that. And so I know what that felt. I suddenly felt very, very vividly where I was, and the reality of it, and the fact that although I couldn't see France and I couldn't see the rest of Europe, I somehow imaginatively grasped its reality in that moment, that it was really there. And I had other moments like that. So reading this book, and then other adventures, you mentioned Crowley. I mean, that was, I plunged into that when I moved to Los Angeles, where most crazy things happen in LA. And there used to be this fantastic old bookshop called Gilbert's on Hollywood Boulevard. And people like Jimmy Page, the guitarist from Led Zeppelin, and Bowie, and Kenneth Anger, the avant-garde filmmaker, and all of them are, Crowleyites, fans of Crowley's work. They used to go there because they had a fantastic section of occult books and rare books and things of that sort. And I went there as well. And again, long before social media, so they had the old-fashioned bulletin board, and there was a notice up for the Crowley group, and never the armchair magician. I thought, oh well, let's check it out. See what this is about. Yeah. So I got the number and wrote something, and then a couple of days later, there's a knock at the door. We're living, in LA with Lisa in a house with other people. We're sharing a place, and this guy, and he's like, "Are you ready to, devote yourself to the knowledge and conversation of your holy guardian angel?" And I had to think about that. I had to think about that for a second. It's sort of like a Jehovah's Witness asking you, do you want to join us? And I couldn't believe it. And I said, "Oh, okay, fine, sure, yes, why not?" So I joined, and it was interesting for a while. The most interesting thing now, when I look back, is I believe I was initiated into it by a fellow named Grady McMurtry, who was a U.S. Military officer who met Crowley, I think during World War II or after, when Crowley was in his last days. Must have been his last. Yeah, must have been later. Must have been when he was in. Certainly when he was in Hastings at this place called Netherwood, which was a boarding house that actually catered to rather eccentric individuals. And boy, they really got a number when Alistair turned up. But this fellow had one of Crowley's organizations, the OTOs, the Ordo Templi Orientis, so the Order of the Oriental Temple, and it claims to go back to the Knights Templars from way back, the Crusades, but its main interest was in the form of sex magic, and that was Crowley's specialty as well. And there's another group called the AA, Argentum Astrum, the Silver Star, which was less that oriented, and something more like the Golden Dawn or Rosicrucian kind of thing. In any case, can't go into detail about this stuff. But it was interesting. But I mean, but subsequently realizing that okay, I had some contact with someone who actually knew him. So historically, that was interesting to me. But it's kind of like a Crowley fan club, and I mean, true blue people who really believe in Thelema Crowley's philosophy of do what thou wilt. They say it's do what thou wilt, so it's not do what you like. So there's a fine line that's often crossed between what you're wilting and what you're liking. And I think often people kind of get confused on that path. And so I think I found myself amongst characters where that was kind of the case. And so after a while, I mean, I tell this story. I tell the story in more detail in an earlier memoir, which is just about my rock life called New York Rocker, and that's still in print. But I sort of skate past it in this one, but I do mention it. It's kind of like this guy was a little Crowley on his own. I mean, Crowley, in many ways, he was brilliant and all that, but he was a sort of a cult freeloader, and basically lived off other people's money and do what that wilt for him is basically I'm on my path, and if you get in my way, your orbit is wrong. Your orbit has become askew, and you must somehow adjust yourself because of that. So, but that I lost interest in that. But you mentioned Gurdjieff, and that's the second group that I joined, and actually had much more profit from, and stayed with the longer. And this was in New York, and then in Los Angeles, and would have been 81 in New York, and then until about 85 in LA. And no, that was much more serious, and the people involved were much more serious. And I mean, again, I was brought to that from reading Colin Wilson, because Colin Wilson wrote about that in The Occult. And then I started reading Peter Uspensky, this Russian philosopher who became sort of the most brilliant and eloquent exponent of Gurdjieff's philosophy, although he was a brilliant writer in his own right. But I started reading his books, and that's how I kind of got into it.
Yeah. So do you, are you an adherent or a follower or a practitioner of any groups these days, or is all this just sort of part of your past letters, so to speak, past life and life?
Well, I mean, I've dedicated my life to these things. That's what I've been doing, is writing about them, thinking about them, understanding them, trying to connect them up in different ways, because they often have resonances, but because they're sort of sectarian, they kind of keep to themselves. So because I've written about Gurdjieff, and I've written about Rudolf Steiner, and I've written about Madame Blavatsky in Theosophy, and I've written about Colin Wilson, and I've written about Jung, and I've written about Swedenborg. Somebody, I'm sure I've forgotten a few in there. And if I ever go to, say, a Jungian group or Swedenborgian or Steiner, I always try to say, well, you should check out so-and-so because it's very similar. And that's where I think it's important, this kind of meeting place between these sorts of things. And in many ways, Wilson's ideas for me are a good way of looking at it that way, a vehicle for doing it, because he's kind of like himself, kind of meta up above. And again, it's not in some academic, he's just a very good writer, but he's electric to ideas. I mean, one of his, not heroes, I'd say idols, but I mean, something like H.G. Wells, who isn't any occult at all, it's all science, but he has this electrified intelligence that's like vitally alive to ideas. And this was the thing that got me going too. I just like the life of ideas became my own life's blood. So, I mean, I started out with a naive teenage fascination with this kind of stuff. Ooh, wow, what is all this all about? Yes, I'd love to have these superpowers too. And then gradually it became, yes, I'm very interested in consciousness and its potentials, but I'm interested in sort of the history of the stuff as well. And then and again, I'm not trying to sell it, and I'm not trying to argue for woo-woo or anything like that. But if you actually do the homework and you spend some time, you can see how many of these ideas actually been very much a part of Western culture, from its earliest days on to now, and they don't disappear. And in one book, I don't talk about it so much in Touch by the Presence, but a book I did called The Secret Teachers of the Western World, which is kind of a history of this esoteric tradition. I see it in the context of, I don't know if you know Ian McGilchrist's book, The Master and His Emissary.
The Master and His Emissary, yes.
Yeah.
And
so there's this...
yeah.
Go ahead. Well, it's
No,
this kind of rivalry between the two sides of the brain. And to put it simply, I kind of see this Hermetic esoteric tradition as a body of right brain knowledge that's been under attack by the left brain for the last 400 years. So that's how I see it. That's why in the context of this book. So I'm
sure.
trying to see it historically and that as well. That's why it doesn't disappear. It turns up. And I'm not an occultist, although I have practiced different things at different times in the past. But one thing I tend to think of myself as a naturalist. So I pay attention when something happens by itself rather than trying to make something happen. So I guess that would be a kind of phenomenology of it, difficult to pronounce and even more difficult to explain what that means. But basically, watching what happens.
Could you give an example of that? Just like how you.
Well, I mean, one of the things was, I mean, I discovered. Well, I just discovered. I mentioned these dreams, and then
Right.
subsequent. So this is going back again quite some time to the early 1980s. I read a book called An Experiment with Time, and it was written by a fellow named J.W. Dunn, who's an aeronautics engineer, and it came out in the 1920s. I mentioned Wells. Wells
Sure.
read it and became a friend of his, and actually his other time. Well, he wrote many times. The time traveler is the time machine is the one we know, but he wrote quite a few other books dealing with time travel, and one of them is called The Shape of Things to Come, and it's about a future history, and it's based on this notion that in this book, Dunn discovered that he was seeing parts of his own future in his dreams. So just by chance, he discovered that bits and pieces of his own future were turning up. So as if in a film, scenes that, are happening over there were showing up here. So scenes in the film are showing up before they should have, and it's your own personal film. So long story short, I just decided, okay, I'll just do what he did. I'll start writing down my dreams. And I started doing that, and lo and behold, very soon after, I discovered this was true. And strangely enough, this weekend, I will be at Oxford here giving an after-dinner talk it's an annual conference of the Society for Psychical Research. And I'll be talking about this precisely. I'll be talking about my precognitive dreams, which is sort of, there's a saying here in England, like bringing coals to Newcastle. It's kind of like selling refrigerators to Eskimos, when I was growing up, so it's like, they asked me to do it, so I'll be doing that. So I just discovered much later, I wound up writing a book about this, but I just paid attention. So I mean, there's a variety of different, I mean, I did experiment with a variety of different things, exercises, doing stuff, all that. And they're very helpful at times. And one of the things I try to do coming out of the Gurdjieff work that I was in was this notion of self-remembering, which is basically just being aware of yourself when you're in the midst of something. Most of the times we're not, and I'm just as guilty as that as everybody else. But you can put a little bit more of yourself into some activities, and especially if it's like a repetitive thing. A sort of some boring thing that you have to do, you can't avoid doing it. And if you somehow consciously put more, not necessarily effort, but just enjoy it, force yourself to enjoy, and then actually it can become enjoyable. And enjoyable means that you were there, you're doing it. You're not doing it automatically. The sense of enjoyment is your own feeling and sense of your own self being involved in it, not. Well, Colin Wilson calls it the robot, and Gurdjieff, it's you're being mechanical. So there's a kind of part of ourselves. We do lots of things unconsciously, and we have to do lots of things unconsciously. We couldn't do absolutely everything consciously. We'd never finish tying our shoes. But there's lots of things that we should do consciously that we don't. We give over to this mechanical side of ourselves. But if we can invest that with more of us in some way, then it's not mechanical.
Yeah, I don't know if this is related to that, but it sounds like it's similar. You mentioned in the book, it's almost like a meditative practice that you were taught, where you hold a pencil in front of your face and concentrate it on it fully, and put all your attention, and then you sort of relax into the bigger space. Is that something that?
That's more specific kind of practice, and this is something Colin Wilson developed. He called it the pen trick. I mean,
Yeah.
take a pen, and actually, where it comes from is and this is a story E. McGilchrist tells in his book Master and His Emissary, in order to illustrate how the two brains work, how the two brains working together actually can
Right.
produce a moment like what we're just talking about, being more aware, more awake. And it's that and that constriction and open, contraction and expansion. And I can't even go down that line because that goes back to Goethe's talking about that in the 19th century. But in any case, both of them, Colin Wilson and E. McGilchrist, in two different places, years apart, tell the same story. And the story is that the poet William Wordsworth and his friend, the writer Thomas de Quincey, most famous for his book, The Confessions of an English Opium Eater. They're up in the Lake District, which is far north of where I am in London. And they're out for a walk. And De Quincey asks Wordsworth, how does he come to write his poetry? And Wordsworth says, I don't know. I have no idea. It just happens. And back in that day, long before anything that we have today, Wordsworth was expecting the mail coach. Right, the mail coach was coming from a place called Chiswick, and he actually put his ear down to the path, the road, and he could hear whether he could hear. And it's old. It's not rubber. It's old, wood wheels. So way back then, creaky. He could hear it, and he's concentrating. He has to. It's not rumbling, but he has to concentrate in order to hear it or not. And he relaxes doing that, and it's turned into evening. And I don't know if it's the evening star, but stars are out. And again, there would have been more stars because there's no electricity yet. And he looks up and he sees a star, and he says to De Quincey, "Oh, now I know how poetry comes to me. Whenever I fix my attention on something that has absolutely nothing to do with poetry, and concentrate on it, and then relax, the first thing I see looks beautiful to me."
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So this is that doing that. So Wilson said, okay, if that happens by accident, can we make it happen? That's one of the things. Can you make it happen? Because it happens. It happens when we do this all the time. This is the kind of thing. There's some involuntary mechanism, for sake of a better word, where we do this kind of thing. And you go like that, whenever there's that's why Wilson and other things says crisis and inconvenience is one way in which we can become more awake. We can throw off what he calls the robot. And Gurdjieff had the same insight because he became a master of creating crisis, a master of creating inconvenience for his students and all that. But Wilson said, okay, let's see, can we induce it? So he said, take a pen or anything, could be any object that you can isolate from everything else around you. So you hold it up to yourself, whatever. I mean, I did it with a group of people he was leading in San Francisco many years ago, and he included what he called Reichian breathing, and this is a kind of breathing technique that Wilhelm Reich had developed, and he just finished writing a biography of Wilhelm Reich, and in which he incorporates his at the time intuitive insights into the right and left brain, which I subsequently have written about not too long ago on my blog. I think in many ways he intuited what McGilchrist has spelled out in great neurological detail and scientific detail. I mean, Wilson was a neuroscientist; he's just a writer, but he intuited some of the things I think that are very, very important, very similar. But in any case, he said, so we're lying on our backs in this place in San Francisco, taking deep breaths, and we're all holding up a pen or something like that. And he says, okay, so concentrate on the pen. Just focus on the pen as much as possible, right? So you don't see anything other than the pen. So the background's all a blur. Everything around you is all a blur. And focus on that as tightly as you can. I forget how long for. And then relax that. And so the foreground comes in. Or I mean, the background comes in. So it's foreground, background, basically. Foreground is the pen, background. And he basically says you keep doing that until it really hurts. It starts to hurt. And it's a pain. And he said, if you just keep going, you go past the pain, we'll have induced what he called the peak experience. And it's all of these things are connected. How when the left and right brains work together, waking up,
Yeah.
getting off the robot, having a peak. Abraham Maslow's term for these kind of natural, unsolicited moments of delight that often come in the context of something that we take absolutely for granted. This is another theme. I've been working on this in the book I've been working on now over this year, about how often these mystical experiences come in the context of something that you absolutely take for granted, and then you have this moment of seeing it, for the first time, kind of thing. It's what I call the of course effect. And the whole aim of philosophy is to understand, what did you say of course about? What did you just see when you said of course? When you looked at something you've seen every day of your life, and then suddenly, this happened to me this happened to me years ago when they had the first lockdown here, the first COVID-19 lockdown. And I tell the story in this book, and I've written an article about it, and it's up online somewhere. But I went out my window. I have this, nice flat here. You can see a bit of it. And I have a garden, and my private garden opens up to a larger communal garden. So one of the mornings during the first lockdown, I walked out, morning coffee, out into my garden, took a breath, looked up, and I thought, what's that? And it was the sun. And for a second, I had no idea what it was. I was completely surprised by the sun. This is the theme. And again, this is faculty X. I factually, it's 93 million miles away. It takes 8 minutes and some change for the light to get here. It's, I don't know how many millions of Earths. It's been there for 5 billion years, be another 5 billion. I mean, I knew all those facts. In fact, for a brief while, I was a science writer for UCLA, and I interviewed someone who had studied the sun for 15 years, and I could probably dredge up what he told me about sunspots and things like that. So I knew all these facts, but suddenly the sun was there as a real thing up in the sky, and it wasn't doing anything strange. It just, and what I subsequently, I tried to analyze, okay, what's happening now? And because of all the, measures taken, the safety measures, the health safety measures here, having to wear masks and gloves and all that kind of stuff. And then also, in the initial days of the lockdown, all of the big supermarkets were completely gutted because people freaking out, hoarding stuff, took everything, except matzahs. There was like a whole line of matzah crackers. It hasn't got that bad yet. Soon they'll come for the matzahs. But in any case, so I was on my bike and I'm cycling to different parts around to go to the little shops, the mini marts. They still had stuff, and so it was all kind of emergency. It was like emergency kind of, slight crisis. Everything was different. Everything was slightly different, and all of that. You couldn't go out and all that kind of thing, and I thought, I'm in this kind of alert, crisis mode, and somehow all of the things I've been doing, they more or less told the robot or my mechanical side, look, this is really important. You have to be here. You can't leave this to the automatic pilot. You have to remember to do all the stuff, to wipe down the stuff, the antibacterial and all those little things. And so that morning when I walked out, somehow I saw the sun, me, not this mechanical side of me that likes to take care of everything, but this over efficient valet that likes, and that we allow to take care of everything for us. So he was off duty briefly, and I saw the sun, and it became like, that for that second, whatever, that was more real than at any other time. The closest thing was, I remember when I was a kid, and we used to go on holidays to the Jersey Shore, and I'd lie on the beach on these endless days, which today go by so fast. But these endless days, and I remember looking up at the sky, and it just seemed like it was endless, and the sun was just this, tint. I can't even begin to say what it was like, but it's like that. Or when you pick up a leaf and you see it for the first time. So all that kind of, what do you want to say? I know what that's like, and I try to keep a taste of that, and in some way, inform my everyday life with some remembrance of that. And I guess memory is one of the things too. We have very bad memories, and we forget everything.
Yeah. So is this like the related to what you were talking about earlier with dreams and sort of the precognitive effect, almost that you always have this in the background, and then something allows you to sort of come in touch with it.
Yeah. I mean, the precog. At different times I've had more. I think as I got older, it's happened less, but it still happens quite often. But I meant by a naturalist, I don't go out of my way to try and make it happen. Or and people have books about how you can induce this or that, or say
Yeah,
like
right.
lucid dreaming, where you're awake in the dream, which I've experienced that several times, not many, but certainly several, enough for me to know what that's like. But then this whole idea, okay, you're in that state, and then you can manipulate the dream, as it were, and for all different self-development reasons and all that. But I kind of think, well, isn't that the ego coming into some part of ourselves that isn't that? And so that would be my Jungian kind of background, in the sense that, well, the dream is a natural product of the psyche. So, and it's not the ego. It's the opposite of what the everyday I is. It's what we don't know about ourselves. And so somehow I not so much I criticize people that do that, but I don't want to kind of do that. But if something strange happens, I note it. I'm aware. We live in a world where these things happen. The other thing is like synchronicities. I mean, precognitive dreams and synchronicities, meaningful coincidences, the kind that knock you over the head, and you absolutely think someone knows what you're thinking, which is, I know what crazy people think, but hey, that's never stopped me. So, I mean, those two things have been so real in my life that I just accept the world as such that these things happen. I have no theory other than, consciousness is broader and wider in some ways than we normally take it to be. And I try to explore different ways of understanding that through these different people I've written about, and through my own experiences.
Is part of the process that you encounter this almost your writing? I mean, with 25 or what is it, 25, 26 books out? I mean, it seems like the way you sort of interact with reality and make sense of it is to write about it in a way. Is that, or am I?
Yeah. I would say that's true. Yeah, I mean, in a way, that's a practice. I mean, I don't want to sound portentous about it, because I'm, trying to be a popular writer. I'm not.
Well, it's a great
not quite as popular as I'd like to be. But no. I mean, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, I love writing these things because I have an opportunity to put my thoughts together about them, and not only the thoughts. It's like it's experience it in some way. It's a kind of felt existential or Gnostic, the ancient Christian sects, the Gnostics. They were very early Christians, and they pursued what they called gnosis, is a Greek word for knowledge, but it's different from factual or book learning or epistemic knowledge of the senses. It's a kind of direct, immediate, and along the same lines of, like, Wilson's Faculty X and other kinds of things like that. So this other way of knowing, this is a way I talk about in the book of mine called Lost Knowledge of the Imagination. There's we're taught one way of knowing, and it's a very good way, and it's the essential way, indispensable. We can't do without it, but it works a good part of the world. But there's lots of the world it doesn't work for, and there's indications from different sources that there's another way of knowing, more intuitive, more right brain, more immediate, more participatory, knowing with rather than knowing, that or something like that. So I try to explore that in different ways too. And it bleeds into different things: philosophy, poetry, mystical experience, spiritual kind of exercises. That I think they're all dealing with the same thing in different ways.
Yeah. So is Colin Wilson the in terms of people you met, the person that has had the most influence on you? I mean, obviously maybe for a writer, but we can also talk about musicians too, perhaps.
Well, I mean, in my early days when I was a musician, I mean, like I said, I grew up, listening to the Beatles. I was, a big Beatle fan and all that, and Bob Dylan and so on. And then later, but actual contact with musicians when I was in New York. How should we say? Well, there was a band called Television.
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh yeah.
Their first incarnation, they had a bass player called Richard Hell,
And
who,
the
like myself,
Voidoids.
yeah. Well, he's late. He came later. I mean, he left. Well, again, I mean, the fact that he
I don't
left.
think
And he left this is how I wound up playing in Blondie. Is that Richard Hell, who invented punk rock? He was the one. He was the
Yeah,
first one to wear
right.
the rip T-shirt. Okay. And like myself, he couldn't really play, but he played bass enough to be able to play what they were playing. And Television was a fantastic band, and Tom Verlaine and Richard Lloyd and Billy Ficca, and they were just absolutely fantastic band playing in CBGB. All right, and then Hal had a style, the sunglasses and all this kind of thing, and he looked like if you know the Truffaut film, The 400 Blows. The kid, he
Yes,
looked like the kid.
I
The
see.
kid, I can't remember the
Yeah,
kid's name, and the same actor turns up in two or three other Truffaut's films, but he had the slick
yeah,
back kind of shock, hair and all that kind of stuff. So he had the street urchin kind of look to him, and his attitude, and then but he left, started the band called the Heartbreakers with some of the members from the New York Dolls, who were slightly earlier generation New York underground band who influenced me. Um, but then Television, when Hell left, they needed a bass player, and they stole the bass player from Blondie, this guy Fred Smith, who was playing with Debbie and Chris and my friend Clem, the drummer. So he left to join Television, and so that's why I was asked to play with them. But Verlaine, I mean, I think he just was a remarkable guitarist, and that whole
yeah.
time um, in New York, then at least for me, say 75, 76, on the cusp of people getting their record deals, before the suits arrived, when it still was like a Fellini movie, really all the cool people, sunglasses and smoking cigarettes and all, and barely clapping, because you don't want to be. If you're in New York, not like here. When I came here, people went out of their minds at concerts. They were mad
Yeah.
animals, But in New York, everyone was like, too cool. All that period was just fantastic, because it really was a blend of poetry and simple rock and roll. I mean, Patti Smith and Verlaine and Hell, they had started out as poets. They started out writing this kind of symbolist, kind of thing, and so Verlaine, obviously, going back to Paul Verlaine and Patti Smith, Go Rambo, and they had a relationship for a while and all that kind of thing. So all that atmosphere for me was I don't know how to say it. Of course, I was young too, but it has a peculiarly, I don't know how to say it, poignant sense of something unique happening, for a brief period there. But I guess because I thought, I'm good too. I've written, songs. My song "Ex Offender" was the song that got Blondie its record deal and all that, and I played guitar on that, not bass, and blah blah blah. So I did a lot else. So I had a high opinion of myself. Hence, leaving Blondie to have my own band. So I was influenced by these people, but I was around them, so I wasn't. I mean, eating Colin Wilson, he was a writer. I wanted to be a writer since I was a kid, and I don't know why. At some point when I was an adolescent, I just wanted to be a poet. I don't know. I have no idea, but I started writing poetry then. And in the book, I almost completely resist including any of it. But in a footnote, there is a brief excerpt from one poem I remember. So you'll have a chance to judge how bad it was. But, but then, reading his books and just the ideas, just feeling this power of the ideas. So I identified with that, and that was a role model in the sense of I don't know, and perhaps it wasn't a father figure, but again, I guess sort of like that. I mean, in the sense of I don't know, not quite, because we weren't. He knew lots of people, lots of fans came to him. He had lots of people coming there, so I didn't have a particularly close relationship with him, but in the sense that he became a kind of role model and this mentor in the sense of, I want to do that. I'd like to be able to write about these sorts of things as readably as he does, let's say. So, and insofar as I have any readableness or readability, I don't know quite. Insofar as you can read my books, it's because I read and reread his books over and over. And one reviewer of his book said, Colin Wilson could make the telephone directory gripping. So, and it's true. He has this fantastic narrative style. So, I just want, and why, I don't know. I don't know. He even said to me, why do you want to do this? I mean, why do you want to do? It's the same thing. When my career choice, immediate career choice after music was to teach philosophy. I went back to university in my late 20s, and the philosophy professors, when they found out what I was doing before, they found it incomprehensible. They couldn't believe, well, why do you want to do this? You're in a rock band. We want to be in a rock band, but why do you want to do this? So, but I don't know. I just had some, I don't know, something just has compelled me to do it. And so here I am. And there you go. The book, that's what the book is about. My compulsion to become who I am.
Yeah. Well, it's blessed. I mean, you've got to live in both worlds, so to speak. You know, not too many people can do that.
Yeah, and I've had a fantastic time, and I've met many interesting people, and had many wonderful experiences, and some not so wonderful. But that always happens.
Yeah. So, what do we? Should we talk about the new book, the Of Course Effect, the book that talks about
Well,
that?
I mean,
Or is that still hush hush?
yeah, no, yeah, it's still hush hush. I mean, I just pop it
Okay.
up.
Okay. Never mind.
I generally
Okay.
don't talk. I generally don't talk about a work in progress,
It's okay.
but that's okay. I mentioned it. But
Well,
I mean,
we already know.
but the thing is, in Touched by the Presence, there are moments where the sort of thing I'm talking about in this other book I'm working on now, I describe moments where I have it, where it's. I talk about one trip in the early '90s where I was married at the time, to someone I subsequently referred to as affectionately as my future ex-wife. So I was married to my future ex-wife at the time, and we were in England, and we had gone down to visit Colin and Joy in Cornwall, and spent a weekend there or something like that. But I remember on the way driving back. This is when I lived in California, so we had come over for a holiday, and we stopped at some service station to use the loo, as they say, the toilet. And I just remember, again, it's not going to sound like anything describing it, but in the book I remember like looking up at a chimney, and it must have had a fire going because there was smoke coming up, and somehow this crystal cold air, the smoke just almost seemed solid, as if I could have grabbed it, and kind of like in Hokusai, like, or those Japanese paintings where it's something, it's this kind of I'm going to call it not brittle, but it's a tactile character to something that it would not have. Ordinarily smoke, you wouldn't, it would be misty and all that. So, but just the sheer being of something, the isness, what the German 12th century mystic Meister Eckhart called Istigkeit, which is what the Germans have. The Germans have a word for everything. They have a great word for it. So Istigkeit, isness. We don't have a word like that. Isness. We have being. So is something is.
Being and nothingness.
Yeah. Well, yeah. This is on the other book. So this is a taster. This is a taster for the other books. So there you go. So.
Yeah, no, that's great. So, well, we'll look forward to that when that comes out, and of course, it's already precognitive. It's already been written. It's just a matter of staring at the pen long enough, and doing the pendulation or whatever
There
you
you
want to
go.
call
Yeah.
it between the two books. Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. So who won the argument between you and David Bowie?
Oh, okay.
Was
Well, I
it
tell you. Oh, that one. Okay. Well, okay. Well, I mean, well, okay. I'll tell the story. You can decide for yourself. No, this was during a time when I was sort of between bands in New York. I had disbanded my band, The No, KNOW, and I chose that name because of my interest in Gnosticism, which I mentioned earlier, Gnosis. And
Yes.
we didn't get a full-on contract. We released a couple 45s, and we were a big bi-coastal band between LA and New York, and all these kind of East Coast, West Coast tours. But after 2 years, we didn't get a deal. So, and I had become too smart for rock and roll at that point because I read too many books, and I couldn't write songs anymore. No, I couldn't write songs. My girlfriend at the time, I'd broken up with Lisa, who had inspired me to write many songs, but other girlfriend I had, it just wasn't like that. any case, and I just, I was getting tired of it. This is before I was asked to write shotgun, as it were, on Iggy Pop. Iggy Pop's, it was kind of like the Wild Bunch. It was like a hired gun, just play guitar with him for 2 tours. But any case, a friend of mine was invited to David Bowie's loft space, which I believe is like Midtown Manhattan. I mean, this is about sometime 1981. So it's quite some time ago. And he invited me along. He said, well, I had met Bowie. I said he played keyboards on the first Blondie, for Iggy Pop on the first Blondie tour. And then telling the book, we actually had an encounter at the Mud Club, but I won't go into that one. And I mean, we weren't friends or anything, but I, had met him a couple times. And I listened to his music religiously. And before I started playing, up until about Diamond Dogs, I lost interest after that. But at this place, we're there, and a certain pharmaceutical powder is going around, which is getting everyone.
I think you called it a dust, a magic dust.
Yeah, dust. So getting everyone very excited, and apparently Bowie had been talking about the occult because it was something that he's interested in at different times, and fans of his will know various different expressions of it in different albums of his, and somehow the conversation had dropped down. And my friend said, "Oh, well, Gary knows all about the occult because he reads Colin Wilson." And this is before I had met. Well, this was before I had met Wilson. But I had read a lot of his books by then. And at the drop of Wilson's name, Bowie says, "Colin Wilson. Oh, he leads a coven in Cornwall." And I think, well, he writes about this stuff, but I don't think he leads a coven. I'm saying to myself, and he goes around, he draws pentagrams on people's doors and all this kind of stuff. And I said, well, David, I don't think he does that. Oh, yes. And he goes on and on. It's about him like drawing down the spirits of ectoplasmic Nazis or I don't know what, just like weird stuff. And he goes on. And I'm stupidly naive, just sitting there and thinking, well, actually, no, I don't think that's right, David. I really don't think that that's true about Wilson. I've been reading his books for years and years, and there's no mention of anything like that ever about him. And then I'm so dumb and dense that I slowly realize I'm creating a scene because everyone else is quiet, and I'm basically, as politely as possible, telling Bowie that he doesn't know what he's talking about. And this goes on a couple more volleys until he had 2 female bodyguards, and I think it's Diamonds Are Forever. I think this is the penultimate Sean Connery James Bond film, and there were 2 female assassins called Thumper and Bambi in there, and they were like that, the big girls, and they just came over to me and they basically said, David's tired. We think you should leave. So I agreed with them, and I allowed them to escort me out of the place. So I don't know who. I mean, I guess round to him.
By default.
Well, I mean, this is one of the things. I never learned how one should be around the aristocracy. I've never learned I never learned how to somehow ingratiate myself with these people and to advance my career, because I always felt to begin with I'm just as good as they are. But not in that world. But when I met Colin Wilson, oh yes, all right, whatever, yes, please, So it was a different context there. But I think that was one reasons why I just didn't make it in that world, because I just I was not can I get in the photo person. There's so many people like can I get in the picture? It's like I couldn't care less whether I was in the picture or not. So
I thought it was the pogoing.
Oh, well, that was late. Oh, no. I mean, that's on stage. Picture of me. Okay, so, I mean, if you're hanging out like with these other named people, you're hanging out with Bowie, you're hanging out with Iggy or whatever, all these other people that might be around. It's like, oh, can I get in a photo? Like today, can we have a selfie? Kind of thing. And I just wasn't interested. But no, I mean, that was the other thing. I was playing in Blondie. I still have it. I wound up getting a short scale Rickenbacker bass, and it's a rare instrument, and not too many people have one. And I subsequently came to understand that I'm one of the few people who actually have one of these things. I still have it, the same one I played. But I used to have what they call the Fender Precision, which is a standard long neck. Because the bass strings are so thick, you really need a long neck to get the right tone and tuning out of them. But they thought I would decapitate Debbie because I was like jumping around with this thing, like the scythe or something like that, and I was going to whack her head off. And but I just was excited. I just was, what they say here is full of beans or chuffed. I was like really up for it. And I was doing exactly what I wanted to do, and it was always had been a band. It only started to become and Debbie and whatever, you know what I mean? After the suits turned up, and the manager who he pegged me for a problem day one, and we realized that chemistry did not work between us. But that's okay. I sought my destiny, and I'm still looking for it. So
25, 26 books later.
Yeah, you go.
Yeah, across the pond.
I'll nail it. I'll nail it with one of them.
Well, thanks, Gary. I'm glad to share this wonderful memoir with you, and I wish you best of luck. And I'm waiting for the next one to come out. So,
all right. Well, I'll certainly keep you in touch and let you know.
Yeah, if people, so you mentioned a blog and a website. If people are interested in connecting with you and finding more about your...
It's Gary-Lachman. So I don't mean to sound egotistical, but if you just Google me, it'll turn up. So I blog there, and then I'm on Facebook, and I'm on X and Blue Sky and a couple other things. So I know, and there's a lot of articles in the blog. So there's lots of I post something every month. So. And next month, this I'll announce in November. I'm hoping to post my son, my younger son, who I said was the musical, the violinist. He's also He's also a filmmaker. He makes these fantastic films, just with the tech you have available these days. But he's done a short film of the book, sort of an interview with me. So I'm going to put that up on my blog as well, so you can get a glimpse of what the book's about there.
I've seen that. Intertraditions actually sent that in your press release.
Right. What did you think?
No, it's nice. It's cool. I mean, so for somebody that writes books and is in a band now, you produced a filmmaker, so you've got it all covered. I mean, I guess what's left to do?
Well, I've been supporting him while he's earned his degree, so he's going to work that off with, like, if we're going to do a whole documentary or something like that.
Well, there you go.
Yeah,
absolutely. No, that would be good. Yeah. I mean, your books could be turned into documentaries. I mean, any number of them. That would be, that would really be interesting, especially with the so-called occult revival coming on. So, it's wonderful. Well, thanks, Gary.
Oh, my pleasure.
Enjoy the evening, and
I will. And just let us know when this is going to go up, and I'll post about it